Association of Radiation Survivors, a National Association of Atomic Veterans, which sounds very imposing, very devastating.
Yeah.
And for those who don't know, and maybe didn't hear our show a couple of years ago, this is kind of an update of what's happening. Tell us what they are and what's it all about.
Well, the National Association of Atomic Veterans was formed about 10 years ago by veterans who appeared informally before Senate and House committees investigating radiation sickness caused to these veterans by the tests, starting back in the tests in Hiroshima and Nagasaki in 1945 right through 1962 when they stopped the above-ground testing. That association only works with veterans. The National Association of Radiation Survivors, which is only about 5 years old, in addition to working with veterans, has a strong contingent of the widows of veterans who have survived, the genetically damaged children of those veterans, and also the people in downwind who lived in Utah and the natives of the Marshall Islands. So that's a more inclusive group and does not exclude anybody, really.
Okay, and I guess what you're saying, people have probably figured this out, that these two associations were put together to try to derive some sort of compensation or something from the government of the United States because of the tests and the actual wartime bombing in Japan concerning atomic radiation.
Correct. And it goes back to the first test in Hiroshima, as they call that a test now, incidentally.
I was going to say, I was wondering, it seems to me your tests actually were before that, though, weren't they?
Well, it was one test before that, but that was just the one at White Flats, and the people stayed 10, 15, 20 miles away from that one. There was nobody close to that one even.
So then the next bomb was actually right on Japan.
The next one was on Hiroshima, and that was one type of bomb, and they tested another type of bomb at Nagasaki. So they were definite tests, and that they weren't sure either one of them would work.
Let me just jump in here, because I think people are saying, well, hey, what's that got to do with American veterans? But this is where you come in, because you were in the armed forces at the time, and somebody had to go in as soon as the war was over, without thinking, obviously, without knowing what was going to happen. They just sent all these Army, Navy personnel, Marine, whatever, into these cities as part of the occupation forces, right?
That's correct. And at Hiroshima, there have been a substantial number of veterans who were exposed in taking air samples out of planes in sort of a crude way over Hiroshima. They were flying through the clouds. And one of those people lives in this area and died several years ago in the 50s, in 1950 period. However, most of them were more like myself, who were ground troops. I happened to have been with the Marine Corps, and we were in Nagasaki for 3 or 4 months following the war. Some of them are involved in cleaning up, operating bulldozers and all that sort of thing, but all of us were drifting around in the area.
How many months after the bomb went off were you there?
I was in Japan about 6 weeks after the bomb went off, but I didn't get to Nagasaki until about 2 months afterwards. September 24th, I think, were the first occupation troops that actually went into Nagasaki, and they were Marines of the 2nd Marine Division who had been more or less allotted that area in case there'd been an invasion. So that's the way they assigned the occupation troops. Whatever area your unit was to land in is where you went in the occupation.
Yeah, I think that's interesting to some people out there, that's how close we were to invading the islands. Had the bombs not worked in bringing about a peace settlement, that would have been the next step, obviously.
Obviously. Well, I don't know. As the time goes on, it looks as though Japan had been trying to surrender for some time. So that's controversial.
Was there, maybe you know, I don't know, was there a third bomb planned if they had not?
Oh, yes. Yes, there definitely was.
There was another bomb.
And those bombs were used subsequently in 1946 in the Bikini tests, Abel and Baker, which were the dirtiest tests that were ever conducted, I guess, and there were a great many of the military are exposed there and died as a result of that exposure.
Yeah, I think that's the next step we want to get across. Now, obviously, from those 2 in Japan, and then, of course, the ones at Bikini and some of these other islands, the atolls and out on the Pacific, and then back in this country, the testing of the radiation, the fallout, and I don't mean this as a pun, but the fallout from that has been cancer and deaths of both people in the service and civilians of the America and elsewhere because of this. And I don't know if you have any stats on any of this stuff.
Well, I do have a few. First of all, there were 235 atmospheric tests between 1945, Hiroshima, and 1962 when the above-ground testing was stopped. So, the substantial number. And in those tests, the Defense Department estimates there were 203,000 military involved in those tests, all of whom might have been exposed to some degree or another. When I first contacted you, it was because you ran a public service telephone announcement asking veterans of these places to call in a certain toll-free number, which we did. I did. And there were 48,000 veterans around the country responded to that public service telephone call, which I've always appreciated your giving the number. Of the 203,000, 48,000 responded. And of that number, about 5,000 have subsequently filed claims for benefits. They estimate that about half of those were just kind of just-in-case people, which is, I was one of them at the time. I'm now 75, so I'm obviously not too worried about it. But when I filed it, I didn't know.
Do you have any statistics on how many actually came down with cancer or any other illness that you are pretty sure is attributable to the radiation?
They think there's probably about 2,000 to 3,000. That seems to be the best estimate at this time.
I suppose the question that would come up in many people's minds are that, especially for people in the Army, because we have all been in the service and we know that there are risks, and obviously if you're shot at in a war or hurt, you can't sue the government. And this is where you're running into, I imagine, all sorts of problems, because this happened either while you're in the service doing service-related events or even during a war or right afterwards. And I suppose the government is saying, hey, that's the chances you got to take.
That's true. It's a doctrine. They call it the Ferris Doctrine because of a particular lawsuit. And no, we cannot sue the government for any of this. So what veterans do is file claims through the Veterans Administration. And there's a whole established procedure for compensating veterans for their service-connected disabilities, and there are benefits for their surviving widows and children. But
what you're saying is they're not saying that these are service-connected disabilities.
They have denied that up until February of this year in a case in San Francisco.
What happened in February?
In February in 1987, in a case in San Francisco, for the first time a Department of Justice attorney said that since 1945 the government knew that the people who were put into these tests were at risk and there was a possibility of their getting cancer. And that was up until then, the government had spent millions of dollars denying that there was any knowledge of it or there was any causation. So this opens up a whole new area and is probably responsible for what has just happened in Washington, where I have been at some hearings.
I was going to say, does this announcement or statement by this attorney, is this an official from the top down statement, or did he just speak out of turn?
No, it was in a premeditated in a lawsuit filed in San Francisco.
And he was speaking for the government of the United States and saying that.
Yeah, and what he said was that in February, the Department of Justice attorney admitted in open court that our government has known since the 1940s the danger of radiation. They knew that it could cause cancers and it would cause genetic damage to children. But in spite of that, because of the discretionary function of our government, they felt it was worth the sacrifice of a few men for the good of the rest of the country. That was exactly his words in the case in San Francisco.
That was his words?
Those are his words.
So those few thousand were sacrificed.
Correct.
For the good of the country, supposedly. I'm not sure what the good of the country is except for the money.
That's right.
We're talking money.
Yeah, but not nearly as much as many people would think.
The last time you were here, you mentioned one interesting fact, that the government finally admitted that it might have caused some death in some sheep, and they compensated some farmers for the sheep, but they weren't going to compensate you veterans for as human beings.
That's correct, and since then they've compensated 31 Japanese fishermen who were radiated in a ship that was nearby in one of the tests in the Pacific. And they have compensated the natives of the Marshall Islands and they spent millions of dollars removing the topsoil from Bikini so that can be used
But
again.
veterans, up till this time anyway, so far have not received a thing.
No, there have been 22 have received some type of compensation.
All right. How did they...
They filed their claims through the Veterans Administration, which procedure has now been established. And according to the Veterans Department figures, there have been 4,500 claims filed, approximately, and 22 of them have been granted compensation. And 5 of the 22 received 10% disability because they considered they were only light cancers.
Oh, I see.
Yeah. So you have less than 1% have been compensated.
Yeah, I'm surprised at the number 4,500, though. I would have figured that the claims would have been a lot larger than that, because I forgot how many thousands you said. It probably...
203,000, they say, have been in the test. But with all those phone calls that you people put over the air, only 48,000 responded.
Yeah, 48,000.
Nationwide, 48,000 responded.
But only 4,500 claims or something like that.
That's right.
Only about 10% of them.
And they estimate that of that number, a large percentage were just in case claims.
Yeah. And of course, what has happened, and I'm sure you're aware of it, and I'm sure the people are too, many of these people, or veterans, have died since. Not only from this cause, but maybe any other cause, because we are into an era now. You're 75 years old.
Right. That's right.
So my thought always has been, if they wait long enough in Washington, that era, that generation will be gone. However, there is another generation that is also mixed up in these claims, and that is their children, right?
That's correct. And that's one reason I stopped in the other day and jokingly left that note that that hadn't quite come true, because now there is some legislation that looks like it's going to be approved in Washington, of which we've been testifying, to take care of these veterans and their widows and surviving children.
You said it's not as much as people think. What are we talking about money-wise? Because that would take, I gather this is going to cover those who have made claims, and there'll be some more claims coming, I would imagine.
I don't know, but when I say, it's not a great deal the way the government spends money, just one department of the government, in studying the radiation effects from the 200 and some tests I mentioned, has spent well over $60 million in the last several years just studying one facet of it. And we are, at the present time, we are paying 50% of the hospital care of the people who were radiated, the natives of Japan, the people who lived in Hiroshima and Nagasaki. Our government is paying 50% of their hospital bills with no question at all. So, I don't know whether we're talking about $1 million or $2 million, but it's not a huge amount of money we're talking about, if it's that much.
Well, I would imagine if you came down with an illness, whether related to this, and you checked into a VA hospital, you'd have to say that you're getting at least some care, because they'd have to take you there.
That's correct.
I wondered how many, I don't know how many of these are being taken care of by veterans hospitals. But really what the real compensation is, are those who really came down with cancer early, died, left a widow and some small children, and only got their usual insurance policy.
Yes, correct.
And of course then the question comes up, is the government responsible for something they did in the service during a test? And I suppose that's what the legal,
There've been lawsuits of all kinds filed, and particularly by the widows. The one widow we're working with, and I'll leave a copy of her testimony with you to read because it's tough. She's filed 9 different lawsuits, all of which have been, dismissed for one reason or another, and she has also filed with the VA several times, and she's just not going to give up. Her husband was radiated in the tests in Nevada. He was a young Marine officer, and he died in the early 50s with multiple myeloma and a few other types of cancer. And his would be a type of case that certainly would be service-connected.
Okay, but she would get her normal insurance that she would get for a service-connected disability, or not?
No, she did not. She did not.
Just a normal death?
Normal death benefit.
Okay. And
no, she's got nothing because of the radiation.
Okay.
And he was a major in the Marine Corps.
I guess the government is basing their case not so much on that if you're in the service you take what you get, as whether it was service-related or not. And what they've been trying to prove, apparently over the years, is that just because somebody came down with cancer and just because they happen to also have been radiated, there was no connection.
Sir, yes. And you see that in this country, this has all been monitored by the Defense Nuclear Agency, which has quite an axe to grind. In Canada, for example, any veteran who was in the U.S. tests and comes down with cancer, it's automatically presumed that he got it because of these tests, and they just go right ahead and take care of the veteran and his widow. And then they set up $1,000 a month widow's pension for these people, plus take care of the education of their children. That's just when they come down with these different types of cancers, and it's proven that they were in the test, it's presumed they got it from that.
And this
is
does
in
not
Canada.
apparently carry any weight. I mean, this obviously has been used in testimony before. It carried no weight whatsoever in Washington.
I think it did last week, because as I say, we're getting someplace, finally.
Yeah, it seems like an awful lot of water has gone under the bridge since, though, and a lot of money has been lost by many families.
And the government has spent millions
trying to defend this.
That's right.
Which that money could have gone to the widows and the children.
And there would have been money ahead.
I don't know. I suppose if you've got a claim, whether you can get retroactive, I suppose that's up to a court from now on, up to some sort of a judge or something, if you want to sue.
Yeah, I doubt if it would be retroactive. I think if they'll recognize it, and they'll authorize the Veterans Administration to approve claims as of a certain date for these types of cancers. And as you said earlier, every day there are going to be fewer of them because they're at that age group where they're disappearing rapidly. However, it's been...
And not every child will come down with something, and not every widow.
No. It's a small number, but there's severe genetic problems with the children when they do have this.
Yeah, it's not just cancer.
Oh, no. We have, at this hearing in San Francisco that I mentioned in February in the courtroom, when this Justice Department man said that, there were 2 widows that one had 5 genetically damaged children. The other one had a daughter with her, a beautiful woman, about 21, who was missing one arm entirely, and the other one stopped at the elbow. So that's the kind of thing you have.
That's what they're having in Japan, which they're recognizing as part of Nagasaki, Hiroshima, but the government here has not recognized that this was part of the test.
And again, in Japan, we pay 50% of the aid to the Japanese people.
It doesn't seem reasonable that our government has allowed this to happen up until now.
That's what several senators said on June 30th at our hearing.
I mean, with the facts as you presented them here, it doesn't seem reasonable that our government would even think of such a thing. As you say, they've compensated farmers, animals, Japanese, the Canadians are doing, and yet you, the veterans, and maybe your children are not getting any help, at least up until this time. You fought for, 10, 15 years for this now?
That's right. I've been in it 10 years since just before I heard that phone call from here.
And all right, now, do you have a claim in?
No, I went through all the physicals, but I didn't actually file a claim. I was one of those just-in-case people.
All right, what about...
I went up to the White River Junction Veterans Hospital in accordance with the procedure, and when I walked in, the first thing the doctor said to me, "Why are you here? You don't look like a radical." That was his comment.
Only radicals were doing this sort of thing.
That was the inference. And now it's become legitimate, and really we've gotten a wonderful reception in Senate the last few weeks.
May I ask you, obviously, as you say, you're 75, hearty and hale, and obviously you've been lucky or you had the right genes or something.
Correct.
Any problems with children?
Yeah, we have had, and they're the type of thing that nobody's been able to explain. We had 3 stillborn. We had 4 more that were born prematurely, for which doctors could find no reason. And the last one was born at 6 months and was born deaf. But I've never filed a claim. One reason is you have to do these chromosome studies, and some doctors wanted to do that just as an experiment, and we didn't want to upset our kids. I mean, they got enough problems without worrying about that. So we have not done anything, and I have not filed a claim, and I don't intend to. But that's the answer to your question, which I haven't said much about till you asked me.
Well, I think it's certainly pertinent. You do have some healthy children, though.
Yes.
Yeah. But these are the kind of things that are probably happening all across the country.
That's correct.
And the stillborn, I don't suppose you could... Is there any proof? That's the tough part.
No, there wouldn't be, and we wouldn't go into it personally, but, I have friends that are really gung-ho, patriotic, Southern people, and they have 8, 9 deformed, defective genetically damaged children.
And they've been able to
and they
collect
get
nothing.
And they are furious.
They must be hopping mad, knowing all the
They can't believe their government would do this to them, because, there's something about some of these people in Tennessee and Alabama and whatnot. I think they have a sense of patriotism that we don't have, maybe. But they're certainly hurt at the government.
I'm trying to, I guess, pin down where decisions like this are made. The Veterans Administration itself, or does it go higher, or does it go to Congress, or somebody has to make a decision that we're going to fight this thing?
I would say that it comes from the Defense Nuclear Agency, which is responsible for all the whole nuclear setup of the government. And that seems to be where it stems from. The Veterans Administration, they'll do more or less what they're directed to do. They have certain
Again, trying to pin it down, as you say, it's the way we spend money in this country, as Never Dirksen used to say, give or take $1 million or $1 billion here, It seems like it has to be more than that, whether they're worried about setting a precedent for future wars or what. There seems to be an underlying reason for fighting you guys all these years that has to be more than just money.
Oh, certainly it is. It has to do with the whole nuclear program, whether it be plants, nuclear-powered submarines.
So what they're saying is it is safe. That's what they're trying to get across.
That's what they're saying.
If we start paying off these people, another Chernobyl will come along, or they'll be afraid of another Chernobyl. There will be no more plants, no more nuclear movement whatsoever.
That's what we think. I think. I don't claim to be an expert on any of this, including the veterans part, but that would be my opinion.
All right. What is next now? You've got this one statement from this attorney from Washington, who obviously is speaking for the government, and it came out of the blue, obviously.
It came out of the blue. Shocked everybody.
So where do you go from here?
Well, as I say, coincidentally with this announcement, we've had 3 bills come out of the Senate and the House that look like they have recognized this problem. There's a bill that we were all down advocating called S-1002, introduced by Senator Cranston from California, that would compensate for the types of cancers that they would enumerate, that will do the job, we think. It doesn't do it all, but it's the first official recognition. And for the first time, the American Legion, the Disabled American Veterans, the Veterans of the Foreign Wars, the AM Vets, and the 2 groups that I work with, plus the Gold Star Widows, all were in agreement testifying before Congress on June 30th that this would be the way to go. And it's the first time everybody's been on the same bandwagon. And until the last year, the service organizations, such as the American Legion, have not participated in this at all. But now they're all on the bandwagon. The Disabled American Veterans has done some very good research and has been taking a very powerful statement on it.
Have any presidents in the last 10 or 15 years come out made a statement either way on this thing?
No, under the Freedom of Information and from the Carter Library, we found a memo that just has surfaced where there was considerable concern in the Carter White House that this might be a problem and maybe they should look into it. But it hasn't made any difference whether they're Democrats or Republicans. It's just been the same.
Hands off.
Hands off.
They want nothing to do with it.
Nothing
to do with it.
Congress
themselves, until recently, have kept their hands off for some reason.
Yeah, I would say that we were kooks when we went around 10 years ago. And really, we were a nuisance, and who are these guys? And that's the reason I think the doctor, unconsciously, nice young man up to White River Junction, said to me, you don't look like a radical. That was the whole feeling. We were radicals. It
was interesting, and just to break away a bit, but it seemed to me there was a story once about the movie on the Alamo, which was made by John Wayne, and down in Texas about that time. And I think it was pretty well stated and documented that every star of that movie died of cancer. And some people have actually connected it to the atomic tests not far away.
Yeah, I think the scene was over in the Nevada test site area. And as you say, that's been pretty well documented. And again, I don't presume to be an authority on it, but it looks as though that was the case.
Have you been in contact with some of your buddies that went into, was it Nagasaki?
Nagasaki.
Went into, and how they fared?
Yes, and generally speaking, they they're fine, but there's a small number. I know 4 that have suffered seriously, and I know about 4 or 5 more that, well, probably a dozen that have been exposed in the tests, which were actually even worse in the Pacific. Because in the first tests, there were very few precautions. The Veterans Administration makes most of these denials that I talked about, 99%, based on the data they've secured at great cost on the film badge reading at all these tests. That's a badge they give you to detect the radiation. Well, it just so happens that in Nagasaki and Hiroshima, and I can speak only of Nagasaki officially because I was there were no film badges used. And a senator on June 30th, when I told him that, Senator Pryor from Arkansas, he was amazed because he thought they all had film badges. So the denials were based on what the film badge readings were, but we didn't have any film badges. So, I mean, it's, and it wasn't until after about the 4th or 5th test in the Pacific, I guess, that they got fairly accurate readings on them.
Do you think Chernobyl had any effect on the final decision?
Oh, yes, definitely. See, because our scientists were over there working, and we publicized all the bad stuff about Chernobyl, so they're bound to help us.
One thing that is interesting, we've talked about the American test, 200 and something tests here, plus Nagasaki and Hiroshima. What we haven't discussed, of course, if you're on a worldwide picture, is the tests put on by France, England, China, and Russia over the years, letting loose a lot of radiation, and probably in their early years, they were probably having the same problems.
If not worse.
Well, how are they handling it? Outside of Canada, we know, but...
I can't tell you. I don't know.
Yeah, so there's a lot of radiation that has been exposed.
I know that Britain has taken care of their people, similar to the Canadian situation, but I haven't seen the legislation for the Canada. I've actually seen the law, so that's the reason I quoted it. But I've been told that Great Britain and France have taken care of their people who are exposed, but I'm not sure.
One interesting fact is apparently the incident rate was very high in Chernobyl, but it doesn't seem to be that high in what you're saying. After 6 months, you would think that, just about everybody that was anywhere near Hiroshima or Nagasaki or near these tests would be radiated and will have some sort of an effect. And obviously there's only a certain percentage that are affected, and others, a certain percentage like yourself, although genetically, as you say, it may have gone down to the next generation.
Yeah, that's true, and I don't really know the answers to that. I mean, as I say again, this thing has been studied and studied. I brought you just a stack to show you. I didn't tend to use them, but these are all government studies just on Nagasaki and Hiroshima, and they really have spent a fortune on it, and the figures are not reliable.
Yeah. Well, our time is about up, but I guess you've gotten what you wanted, at least to a certain extent. I don't know.
It's a big story.
Now people can start filing their claims, hoping to get some remuneration.
If the laws are passed, which I think they will be. And incidentally, from my experience with the Senate June 30th, no matter what your interest is, I tell you, your letters are really read and important. They begged us, going back for some time, to get people to write about this, and we have. And you may not think your letters are important, but they are.
They do read them, and they do count them.
They do, and beyond counting them, I found out that they have coffee together, and very frequently the first word that's said in the morning is, "What's in your mail today?" And really, I really urge any of you, because we've done this principally by the force of the widows. They're tough, and they've hung in there.
Yeah, and then, of course, this decision in California can't hurt you.
No, it opened it all up.
Yeah. Well, congratulations, and thanks for being with us.
Thank you very much, Bob, for your help.